So I heard you might be in the market for a DAW controller. No, I don't have one to sell you, but I might be able to help you. I've got 5 tips, 5 things to consider before buying a DAW controller. You got different brands, you have different form factors. Which one is right for your home studio? Well, if you want to gain control of your DAW controller decision, well, why don't you join me? DAW controllers, also known as a DAW Control Surface. It's a huge topic here on the channel. I love using them, as you can see. I love talking about them, and I've got a lot of comments on the videos that I've done, and it's through those comments and questions that I formulated these 5 tips, 5 things to think about before you buy your own DAW controller. Now we're going to go through those 5 tips, and if you stick around to the end, I'm going to make some recommendations as to the type of controllers that might suit the certain type of user. So make sure to stick around for that. All right, let's jump right in to tip number 1. So tip number 1 is managing your expectations. This is something I've talked about quite a bit here on the channel and some of my other DAW controller videos, but it really comes down to asking yourself a question. What is it that you want the DAW controller to control? Now, if you're just buying it because you think it's just going to make everything better, I think that's the wrong attitude because different DAW controllers are good at different things. Now, as you can see, I've got the Icon gear here behind me. Now, I love mixing and panning and transport controls, and I like having a lot of them on the desk. That's what I want. But I don't use these controllers to control my plugins because I don't feel they're that efficient. If they're basic plugins, sure. But if you look at plugins, the GUIs of all the different plugins are just so radically different. And how do you transpose all of those to something that's fixed on your desktop? So it's something you need to think about because one DAW controller is not necessarily going to do everything well. You have to kind of look at your workflow and decide what is it that you want to improve. You know, what are you not able to do with the mouse or something you're hoping to do better, with a controller? Like I said, having your hands on those faders, it's one example that you just can't do with a single click. So you need to ask yourself that question because if you buy a controller thinking it's just going to make everything better, well, you're going to be really disappointed. So ask yourself the question, what do you want that DAW controller to improve in your studio? Tip number 2 is not something I hear often when people are discussing DAW controllers, and that's ergonomics. Now, those of you that are full-time audio mixers or even video editors who are sitting there 8, 10, 12 hours a day with our hands on the mouse, we're at risk for repetitive motion injuries. I mean, let's face it, this is our money maker right here. And when this is hurting, it can really slow us down and really cost us in the pocketbook. So I got a DAW controller in my studio because I wanted to mix up the different gestures that I do. I didn't want to sit there with my hand fixed on the mouse. This way I can move around different gestures on the controller itself. I can stand up and still have access to a number of features. It's just good for our health to keep moving. And it's a big benefit of having a DAW controller. Now, if you're going to get a DAW controller for that reason, you want to make sure that you have the real estate on your desk to put it in the right place. And you have a nice smooth workflow. I have my hand on the mouse. I switch it over to the controller. It's sitting right in front of me. You don't want to, shove it off to the side because you don't have the room. It's an important consideration, but a really, really big benefit. I'm a big proponent of improving ergonomics in a studio, and a DAW controller will go a long way to delivering that for you in your studio. Where the do I put my coffee cup? Don't know if you've heard, but I've got a little Facebook group growing. It's a collection of viewers of this channel, actually some good friends of mine, other YouTubers. We're talking music, recording, rock and roll, guitars, whatever is the flavor of the day. I'm pretty much there every day. I'm going to put a link in the description. It's the Lonely Rockers Club on Facebook. Why don't you join us? Would love to see you there. Tip number 3 is integration. Now, we're going to look at this in a couple different ways. First thing is there are some DAW developers that make their own controllers. I'm thinking Presonus. I'm thinking Avid. They make controllers that are designed specifically for their DAWs. Now, they also work with other DAWs as well, but there's a tighter knit integration. Now, think about plugins, for example. Stock plugins in those DAWs, there might be a better integration on how they connect from the controller to the DAW. But what about third-party plugins, right? But integration is important because if that DAW controller has really good integration with the features that you're going to be using all the time, it's definitely something to consider. If you are a Studio One user, if you are a Pro Tools user, definitely start with the native controllers for those DAWs because you are going to get a closer integration. Now, if the features that you use all the time are not really affected by that particular integration, then you can start looking at universal controllers and see how they integrate the different features that you like to use all the time. Integration is really important because it's all about your workflow. You don't want to be fumbling around. You want to know that the things that you're going to be doing all the time are going to integrate nicely with the controller. So definitely compare features with different controllers to see how the features you use all the time integrate with the controller. Tip number 4 is definitely a big consideration when purchasing a DAW controller is, do you have any a desire to expand it in the future, because some DAW controllers are designed to be expanded. Now, the Icon gear behind me, the Pro X and the G2, they have extenders. So you buy the main unit and then you buy extenders, and then it all fits together and makes it look like one big controller. Other brands, Behringer, Mackie, of course, they also have extenders. So it's definitely something you want to think about. If you're not planning to expand, then you might want to maximize the number of faders that you have room for. I mean, Faderport, they have the Faderport 8, they have the Faderport 16. Actually, they're 16. You get a lot of faders in a pretty small compact package. So you want to think about that before you buy your controller, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you got to sell it and buy another one. That some DAW controllers are designed to be expanded. And if that's something that you think you might want to do in the future, well, definitely check out one of those expandable units, because it'll make it so much easier to expand in the future. And tip number 5 is a big one, and that's support. Whenever I do a review on a particular controller, people always ask, hey, does this controller support my DAW? Well, it actually works the other way around, because the DAW and the controller communicate via a third-party protocol. And more often than not, that's the Mackie control protocol. Now, all major DAWs are going to have that built into the DAW. So as long as the DAW supports that protocol, then it's likely that you're going to be able to connect to that particular controller. Now, it's easy to figure that out. If there's a particular controller that you're interested in, just hop on their website, check out the product page. They'll often list what DAWs they support. Now, if your DAW is not listed, but it does have the Mackie protocol, it doesn't mean it's not going to work. It might work. It just means it's not tested by the manufacturer. Check to see if it has the Mackie control or the protocols built in that you need to connect to the controller. Check with the controller manufacturer, check the product pages to see if your DAW is listed, because if it is, likely it's going to work well. Now, the translation from the protocol to the DAW differs from DAW to DAW. So the experience might be different, definitely from DAW to DAW, but that's a good place to start to see if that controller will support your DAW. All right, so now that we got the tips out of the way, I just want to leave you some quick thoughts on the type of controllers that might suit different types of users. If you're a pure mixer, you just want to have your hands on the mix, I would recommend a controller with a minimum of 8 faders and motorized faders. In fact, in all cases, I recommend controllers with motorized faders. It just means the levels on your controller and the DAW will be consistent always. They'll always match. But if you're a pure mixer, just mixing, pan controls, some transport controls, I would highly recommend a controller with 8 faders. There's a number of manufacturers that make them. So anything less than that, I just don't think you're going to get that mix experience. Now, if you're looking to control plugins, that's a bit of a tricky one, because there's a number of solutions for users that want to control plugins better. The Console one from Softube, but you're going to use their plugins, their SSL channel strips. It integrates into the controller nicely. The buttons are mapped properly. So if you're looking for that kind of workflow, you may want to consider that. SSL has a solution as well where you're going to use their SSL channel strip plugin, and it's going to integrate with their controller. So if you like that SSL workflow, look to SSL. They've got a great solution for that. If you're using all sorts of different plugins, that's a bit tricky, because there's not one controller that's going to be perfect for all different plugins. Now, something like the Slate Raven, which is basically a big touchscreen, you're going to gain access to anything that can, that will fit on that screen. Your faders, your plugins. You're not going to have the same tactile control if you want those actual faders, but that's an interesting type of controller where you've integrated your controller and your monitor, right? Because now you're touching it, and your whole desk situation is going to be different. But that's an interesting way to go. So definitely something to consider if you are you want more control of your plugins. Look to things like, SSL has an option, and Softube. And if you want to go really radical in touchscreen, well, you can look at the Slate Raven. And the last thing is, if you're an in-the-box mixer and you think, well, you'll never get use out of a controller, you might want to consider a single fader controller. Those things are not toys, because what's really good about those is having at least that one motorized fader is writing automation. I think it's just being able to do that in real time. I don't like writing automation with a mouse. I love writing that fader with my hand. It's just far more efficient. I never ride more than one level at a time when I'm writing automation. So having a single fader in your studio, it's a very usable tool. You'll have the transport controls, and if you're recording any of your own instruments, it's always handy to have those transport controls on your desk. But simply for writing automation, a single fader controller is going to allow you to write some smooth automation a lot better than you ever could with a mouse. And lastly, if you want a controller just to make your studio look that much cooler, well, I recommend buying the biggest controller that you can afford. Well, there are my DAW controller tips. I certainly hope that's helped you. Do these tips help you make a decision? Have you made a purchase? Did I miss something? Maybe we didn't quite get there and you need a little bit more information. Well, that's what the comments section is for. Just leave some thoughts down there and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. If you want to do a deeper dive with me, I'm on Patreon. I have affiliate links. I even have merch. It all helps the channel and I really appreciate that. All that information is down below. But the most important thing is to check out another video. I've got one waiting for you right here. And remember, you don't need a band to rock and roll. And I look forward to seeing you again in another video.